Welcome to Mind Tricks Radio, where we'll explore contemporary topics in psychology through interviewing creative and innovative thinkers in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Rollo May, the prominent 20th century psychologist whose work greatly influenced the field of existential psychology. Dr. May's groundbreaking ideas reshaped how psychology views human experience, creativity, anxiety, and the search for meaning. His influential books, including Love and Will, The Courage to Create, and the foundational collection Existence, continue to resonate deeply. Dr. May passed away in 1994, but today we bring his wisdom back to life in this special conversation about existential anxiety, authenticity, isolation, and their impact on existential psychology. This episode is the sixth in a series where I use artificial intelligence to conduct interviews with prominent figures in psychology who have passed away. Of course, the interview is, fictional, since my guests are no longer alive. The voices you'll hear, including that of Dr. May, are artificially generated clones based on their actual voices, and their responses have been created using AI. You may also notice that my own voice in this episode is an AI-generated reproduction of myself. Why not use my real voice? Well, in the spirit of the endeavor, I thought it only fitting to conduct this fabricated conversation with an AI version of me as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this project, what you think of the concept, and any suggestions you might have for future interviews. Before we begin, I want to be clear. This is an AI-generated simulation of Dr. May. This episode is based on publicly available writings, lectures, and research, created solely for educational and historical exploration. There is no financial gain, sponsorship, or commercial intent behind this project. The responses you hear are generated by AI models trained on Dr. May's known work. They do not represent actual statements, endorsements, or official positions from Dr. May himself, his estate, family, or any affiliated institution. This is a speculative academic recreation intended to honor and explore Dr. May's contributions to psychology. It should not be interpreted as an authentic interview or a literal reflection of his personal views. With that said, let's begin our conversation with the existential psychologist, Dr. Rollo May. Dr. May, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you kindly for inviting me.
Dr. May, to start with, I'd like to take a step back and explore your early life and how it shaped your path toward existential psychology. Could you start by telling us a bit about your childhood and family background?
Of course. I grew up primarily in Michigan and Ohio, born into a household that, like many, carried its share of complexity and strain. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and that introduced me early on to questions about the stability of relationships, security, and identity. These early experiences observing human struggles within my own family certainly planted seeds of curiosity about the deeper meanings and uncertainties in life.
I understand those years were not always easy. Later in life, you experienced a significant personal crisis, a severe illness. How did this impact your trajectory?
Indeed, contracting tuberculosis in my early 30s was profoundly influential. You see, at that time, tuberculosis often meant an uncertain prognosis, sometimes death. I spent about 18 months in a sanatorium, bedridden, facing the stark possibility of my own mortality. Those were months of immense introspection. It forced me to ask myself fundamental questions. What truly matters in life? How do we live meaningfully when we're faced with uncertainty and potential death? This personal confrontation with illness was a pivotal moment. It was not just physically challenging, but psychologically and existentially transformative.
It sounds like this confrontation with mortality directly led you to explore existential psychology more deeply.
Yes. Illness, particularly a potentially fatal one, strips away life's superficialities. You're confronted directly with what existential philosophers like Kierkegaard and Heidegger wrote about, the fundamental anxieties around existence itself. For me, these philosophical insights suddenly became deeply personal and immediate, no longer abstract academic musings, but pressing psychological realities demanding attention.
Speaking of Kierkegaard and Heidegger, your early academic career began not in psychology but in theology and philosophy. Could you talk about that transition and how existential philosophers influenced your thinking?
Initially, I studied theology at Union Theological Seminary and philosophy at Oberlin College. I was particularly drawn to Søren Kierkegaard, whose passionate emphasis on personal authenticity and subjective truth resonated deeply with me. Similarly, Nietzsche's ideas about courage and embracing life's uncertainties, and Heidegger's profound exploration of our being toward death, captivated my thinking. However, over time, I found myself increasingly frustrated by philosophy's abstract nature. I wanted to engage directly with people, their experiences, anxieties, and hopes. Thus, the transition from theology and philosophy to psychology felt quite natural, almost inevitable.
And existential psychology became the bridge that allowed you to practically apply these philosophical ideas.
Existential psychology offered a pathway to integrate profound philosophical insights with practical therapeutic applications. It allowed me to address people's lived experiences directly, engaging deeply with their existential struggles, questions of meaning, freedom, isolation, and death in tangible, meaningful ways. Psychology provided me with the tools to move from abstract theory into genuine human connection and therapeutic dialogue.
It's fascinating how your personal struggles and philosophical interests combine to create such a profound psychological framework.
Life has a remarkable way of integrating our experiences and ideas, doesn't it? Often our deepest insights emerge not from mere study, but from lived confrontation with the mysteries and difficulties of our existence. That certainly was true in my own life and work.
Dr. May, your approach to psychology placed a heavy emphasis on what you termed existential anxiety. Could you talk about what exactly existential anxiety is and how it differs from the clinical anxiety most of us are familiar with?
Ah, yes, existential anxiety. You see, existential anxiety is fundamentally different from clinical anxiety in that it is not something abnormal or pathological. Rather, it's deeply woven into the fabric of human existence itself. It's the anxiety that arises from our awareness of life's fundamental realities, our freedom, our inevitable death, our isolation, and our need to create meaning. Clinical anxiety typically involves disproportionate worry or fear about specific events or situations. Existential anxiety, on the other hand, is broader, deeper. It's a natural response to the profound uncertainties and responsibilities of being alive.
Interesting distinction. It sounds like existential anxiety isn't necessarily something we should aim to eliminate then?
Not only should we not eliminate it, we should embrace it. You see, existential anxiety isn't something to be cured or eliminated. Rather, it must be faced courageously. When we confront existential anxiety openly, it can actually become a catalyst for personal growth and creativity. Anxiety, existentially speaking, is not our enemy. It is a signal that we are alive and engaged deeply with life's realities.
You mention existential anxiety as a natural response to the responsibilities of being alive. When I think of existential anxiety, I think of death.
Yes, but you see, the two go hand in hand. When you're aware of your mortality, there becomes an awesome responsibility to make the most of your time.
Because your time is limited.
That's right, and we experience anxiety around how we spend our time, whether we're spending it meaningfully. And as time passes, we're innately aware that our remaining time is shortened and ultimately will come to an end.
Well, that can be depressing for some people, terrifying.
Of course, that's a facet of existential anxiety. But along with this realization, we have the gift of free will to choose what we do. Humans are the only living creatures on Earth who can do this. Animals, plants, other organisms, they lack the awareness of their mortality, so they do what they do without anxiety until they come to their end.
Wouldn't some people call that blissful ignorance?
Sure, if you aspire to have the awareness of a blade of grass. But my point is that humans naturally aspire to grow, mentally and spiritually, to find meaning and purpose.
You mentioned the importance of facing life's challenges directly, without self-deception or avoidance. Could you elaborate on that?
Authenticity is essential to existential psychology. It involves being true to oneself, fully embracing one's own existence, including its inherent anxieties and uncertainties. Many people spend considerable energy avoiding uncomfortable truths, but this avoidance diminishes their freedom and their capacity to live genuinely fulfilling lives. To live authentically means to confront our existence honestly, even when that honesty is uncomfortable or frightening. By doing this, we discover genuine meaning and deep inner strength.
But that's not easy, is it? Many of us resist confronting life's harder truths.
Indeed, and this leads directly into the concept of freedom and responsibility. Freedom in existential terms is not simply liberation or independence. Rather, freedom implies responsibility, the awareness that we ourselves are the authors of our choices and lives. And the paradox is, many people deeply fear this freedom because of the immense responsibility it entails. It is far simpler, though not healthier, to let others decide our paths for us, or to hide behind excuses or rationalizations.
Why is accepting responsibility so challenging?
Accepting responsibility means facing the fact that we alone shape our lives, which can be deeply unsettling. It confronts us with the realization that our choices have real and often irreversible consequences. Many individuals prefer to externalize responsibility because acknowledging their freedom feels too risky or overwhelming. Yet only by embracing this freedom fully can we become truly authentic and fulfilled.
Yet people tend to avoid being authentic and accepting responsibility.
Yes, you see that playing out in our society in so many ways. Distraction with social media, consumerism, immediate gratification, and seeking of pleasure.
Substance abuse?
Of course, it's rampant. And you see in society so many substance abuse treatment programs, and even a flourishing of psychotherapy and mental health practices like yours.
Another profound theme in your writing is isolation, the sense that ultimately we're alone in our existence. Can you discuss how existential isolation shapes our human relationships?
This is a crucial concept and often misunderstood. Existential isolation refers to the awareness that ultimately each of us is fundamentally alone in our subjective experience of life. No matter how deeply we love or connect with others, no one can fully share our personal experience.
That sounds like a pretty lonely realization.
It may on the surface, but isolation isn't something to despair over. Instead, recognizing and accepting it enriches our relationships. When we embrace our isolation, we can relate to others genuinely, without illusions or unrealistic expectations. It deepens our appreciation for meaningful connection, making us aware that our bonds with others are precious, precisely because we choose them freely and authentically.
It sounds like awareness of one's isolation and the anxiety that comes with it prompts us to reach out and form meaningful relationships, to better appreciate their value to us.
Yes, beautifully put.
Dr. May, throughout your career, you interacted with many influential thinkers and psychologists. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how existential psychology compares to other psychological frameworks of your time, especially humanistic psychology. You shared common ground with Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, but where did your perspectives align or differ?
Well, you're absolutely right. I deeply respected Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow and felt a genuine kinship with them. We shared a profound belief in the dignity and potential of the human being and in the importance of personal growth and authenticity. Humanistic psychology and existential psychology both emphasize human experience, consciousness, and the significance of personal meaning, but existential psychology diverges a bit, I suppose, by placing greater emphasis on the inherent tensions and struggles of existence, particularly anxiety, isolation, and the confrontation with death. You see, Rogers often spoke about the conditions necessary for growth, empathy, unconditional positive regard, and genuineness. Beautiful ideas and profoundly important. However, existential psychology adds that life inevitably involves confronting harsher realities and embracing anxiety and uncertainty as essential aspects of authentic living.
Interesting. So perhaps existential psychology acknowledges a darker, yet ultimately richer dimension of human experience?
Authenticity, from my existential perspective, involves courageously facing life's inherent struggles head-on rather than seeking only comfort or self-actualization. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy, while insightful, emphasized self-actualization at the apex. Existential psychology, on the other hand, sees meaning and authenticity as arising precisely through our courageous confrontation with the challenging and often painful aspects of existence.
Another major psychological influence in your era was psychoanalysis, Freud's ideas in particular. How did your existential views align or diverge from Freud's concepts?
Freud was undoubtedly a pioneer, a revolutionary figure who opened up entirely new ways to understand human psychology. He rightly emphasized unconscious motivations, conflicts, and repressed emotions. However, I felt Freud's approach sometimes underestimated human beings' conscious capacity for freedom, choice, and intentionality. Existential psychology insists that while unconscious forces indeed shape us, we are never merely passive recipients of these influences. We possess an inherent capacity for conscious reflection and responsible choice-making. Psychoanalysis often treats individuals as somewhat determined by their past, while existential psychology emphasizes the freedom to transcend one's circumstances through authentic choices made in the present.
So, existential psychology offers more agency and responsibility back to the individual?
Yes, exactly. The existential perspective recognizes the unconscious, yes, but strongly emphasizes our freedom to shape our lives consciously and meaningfully, even in the face of unconscious drives or external pressures.
You also shared philosophical ground with existential thinkers such as Viktor Frankl. Could you reflect a bit on your collaboration or alignment with his work?
Viktor Frankl was indeed an extraordinary figure, and his work had a deep resonance with me. His concept of will to meaning is profoundly existential and echoes closely my own views. Frankl, like myself, believed meaning isn't something given to us, but something we actively seek, something we create even under the most harrowing circumstances. Our philosophical alignment was very close, particularly around the importance of confronting suffering directly. Frankl's experiences as a Holocaust survivor brought profound credibility and depth to his existential theories. Like me, he viewed suffering not merely as something to be escaped, but as an essential dimension of our search for meaning and authenticity.
And yet, each of you approached existential themes somewhat differently, right?
Indeed. Frankl developed logotherapy, a highly practical existential therapy emphasizing purpose and meaning in life. My existential psychology approach tended more toward integrating broader philosophical ideas with therapeutic practice, focusing deeply on the holistic and often paradoxical nature of human existence. But fundamentally, Frankl and I both believed in the power of human beings to face the realities of life authentically, with courage and meaning.
It's fascinating how your work intersects with and complements these influential theories. It seems that Existential psychology bridges the gap between profound philosophical questions and tangible human experiences.
You've captured it exactly. Existential psychology stands firmly at that intersection, honoring both philosophical depth and psychological practicality, empowering individuals to confront life's deepest challenges courageously and authentically.
Dr. May, earlier we discussed how your own illness, specifically your battle with tuberculosis, deeply influenced your understanding of existential anxiety and confronting death. I'm curious, in your clinical practice, were there particular patient experiences that also shaped your thinking about the human condition and existential psychology?
Oh, certainly. Many clients over the years profoundly impacted my theories and understanding of human existence. One that immediately comes to mind involved a young artist who came to me in a state of deep emotional paralysis. He was immensely talented, yet he had reached a point where he couldn't paint at all, completely blocked, creatively frozen.
That must have been very troubling for him. How did you approach this situation therapeutically?
At first he described this paralysis as a sort of vague anxiety about failing, about not being able to live up to his potential. But as we dug deeper, it became clear that he wasn't simply anxious about failure. He was anxious about freedom itself. You see, he was acutely aware that true creativity demands confronting absolute freedom, the frightening realization that one is wholly responsible for one's artistic choices without the guarantee of success or acceptance. His anxiety was existential, rooted deeply in the responsibility and solitude of his creative freedom.
So he wasn't just struggling with the fear of failure, he was wrestling with the overwhelming reality of his own freedom?
It wasn't just fear of rejection or criticism. Those fears are superficial, though admittedly painful. At the core, he feared his own responsibility to create something meaningful from nothing. It was the profound dread of fully embracing his creative freedom and its inherent responsibility. This experience profoundly reinforced my belief that existential anxiety can paralyze us if left unacknowledged, but once confronted, it can unlock tremendous creative power.
And how did therapy progress once this existential anxiety was identified?
We began to explore his freedom and responsibility directly. Instead of avoiding or reducing his anxiety superficially, we faced it head on. I encouraged him to sit with the anxiety, to engage creatively despite its intensity, to use it as fuel rather than as something to eliminate. Gradually he found his courage, embraced his freedom, and returned to his painting with extraordinary passion and authenticity. His work improved dramatically, becoming deeper, more powerful, more authentic than ever before.
That must have been immensely rewarding seeing existential concepts play out so vividly in practice.
Yes, indeed, it confirmed what I've always believed, that anxiety isn't something merely to remove, but something to listen to deeply. Existential anxiety often signals a moment of genuine possibility, an opportunity to move toward greater authenticity, creativity, and meaning. This patient's experience reminded me powerfully of the importance of courage in facing the unknown, the uncharted, and the deeply unsettling realities of human freedom.
Were there other cases in your practice that similarly informed your existential views?
Another memorable case involved a woman who came to therapy feeling profoundly isolated. Despite being surrounded by friends and family, she expressed confusion. Why am I so lonely when I have people all around me? As we explored her feelings more deeply, it became clear her loneliness was existential isolation, the fundamental awareness of being separate and distinct in her own subjective experience of life. No matter how close we become to others, there's always a gap, a space that no one else can fully enter.
And how did acknowledging this existential isolation affect her?
Initially, she was frightened and saddened by this realization, but gradually, through our dialogues, she began to see that existential isolation doesn't mean relationships are meaningless. On the contrary, once she accepted this isolation as part of the human condition, she could form relationships that were more authentic, genuine, and free from unrealistic expectations. Her loneliness eased not because existential isolation vanished, but because she learned to accept it. Her relationships grew deeper, richer, and more fulfilling because she understood and embraced her inherent separateness.
That's a powerful insight, learning to accept rather than resist existential realities.
That's exactly right. This case further reinforced my conviction that authentic human existence involves facing realities directly, be it anxiety, isolation, freedom, or responsibility. Authentic living arises from our willingness to courageously embrace these existential truths rather than fleeing from them.
Dr. May, existential psychology often gets characterized by some people as bleak or pessimistic, almost nihilistic. What do you think about this perception? Is existential psychology fundamentally negative?
Yes, I've encountered this perception quite frequently. But you see, nothing could be further from the truth. Existential psychology is not pessimistic, nor is it nihilistic. Rather, it is deeply life-affirming. It's true that existential psychology urges us to confront difficult truths, death, isolation, freedom, responsibility, but it does so precisely because acknowledging these realities openly empowers us to live more meaningfully and authentically. When we face existential challenges head-on, we become fully alive, engaged participants in shaping our own existence. That isn't pessimism, it's profound optimism, grounded in realism.
Why do you think people tend to interpret existential ideas as pessimistic then?
I believe people often equate optimism with comfort or ease. Existential psychology doesn't promise comfort. Instead, it emphasizes courage, encouraging individuals to confront difficult truths and uncertainties without illusion. If one expects comfort and easy solutions, existentialism might initially appear pessimistic, but genuine optimism, what I'd call courageous optimism, comes from honestly facing and overcoming life's inherent difficulties.
That's a helpful clarification. Another common misunderstanding surrounds the existential idea of anxiety. Can you clarify how existential anxiety differs from how anxiety is generally understood, say from a clinical perspective?
Existential anxiety is often misunderstood because anxiety, in popular language, usually refers to something clinical, something abnormal or pathological that should be eliminated. Existential anxiety, however, isn't pathological. It's intrinsic to human existence itself. It emerges from the awareness of life's uncertainties, responsibilities, and our finite existence. Existential anxiety is not something to eliminate, but rather something to acknowledge, accept, and use as motivation for authentic living. In other words, existential anxiety signals that we are deeply engaged with the fundamental realities of being alive.
Another challenging concept is meaninglessness. Some think existential psychology suggests life is inherently meaningless. Is that true?
That's another important misunderstanding to clarify. Existential psychology doesn't claim life is inherently meaningless. Rather, it states that life has no predetermined meaning. We aren't born into a world with pre-established purpose. Instead, we bear the responsibility, the freedom, to create and discover meaning for ourselves. This, again, might sound daunting at first, but it's profoundly empowering. Rather than passively accepting meaning handed down by society or tradition, we actively shape our own meanings and values through our choices and actions.
So existential psychology actually suggests that meaning is possible and necessary, but that it must be individually created rather than simply discovered.
Precisely. Meaning isn't waiting passively for us to stumble upon. It's something we construct actively. Existential psychology empowers individuals by emphasizing this active creation of meaning. It challenges people to confront the absence of predetermined meanings courageously and creatively. Rather than being nihilistic, existential psychology affirms that our lives can and indeed must be meaningful because we ourselves imbue them with purpose through authentic engagement with life.
That's a beautiful clarification. It seems existential psychology emphasizes courage and active participation in life, even in the face of uncertainty and difficulty.
Exactly right. Existential psychology calls on us to embrace life's uncertainties courageously and authentically, not as something to fear or deny, but as opportunities to create profound personal meaning and genuine fulfillment.
Dr. May, I'd like to shift our discussion toward practical application. For listeners who find existential psychology compelling, what advice would you offer on constructively confronting existential anxiety?
Well, first and foremost, it's crucial to recognize that existential anxiety is not something negative or pathological to be eradicated. Instead, view it as a meaningful signal, an internal alarm indicating you're engaging deeply with life's genuine questions. My advice would be to approach existential anxiety not with avoidance, but with curiosity and courage. Sit with it, acknowledge it openly, and allow yourself to fully experience its depth. In this acceptance, you'll discover that anxiety often points toward significant choices or possibilities, areas of life calling out for your authentic engagement.
Could you share an example of what this might look like practically, perhaps in daily life?
Certainly. Imagine you're experiencing anxiety about a major career decision or an important personal relationship. Rather than avoiding the anxiety through distraction or denial, try asking yourself directly, what is this anxiety communicating to me? What deeper truth or choice is it pointing toward? In embracing anxiety rather than fleeing from it, you'll gain insight into your values, fears, hopes, and desires. Anxiety becomes a guide, a compass pointing toward meaningful change rather than a threat to be avoided.
Another key existential concept is freedom and responsibility. How can individuals authentically engage with their freedom to live more meaningful lives?
Freedom and responsibility are indeed foundational existential ideas. To engage authentically with freedom, one must first acknowledge the reality that you are fundamentally responsible for your choices and actions. Practically speaking, this involves regular, honest reflection on your life. Ask yourself, am I making choices aligned with my genuine values, or am I allowing external pressures, fears, or expectations to dictate my decisions? Authentic living requires courage. Courage to act according to your deeply held truths, even when such actions are uncomfortable or risky. By consciously accepting responsibility for your life choices, you reclaim agency and create genuine, lasting meaning in your life.
Well, speaking of freedom, you discuss how freedom can be a source of existential anxiety. Why is that? It seems counterintuitive.
Yes, at first glance it does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? Freedom is something we're taught to celebrate, to strive for. And yet, what many people don't realize is that true freedom doesn't simply mean liberation from external constraints. It also implies something much more daunting, responsibility. When we become aware that we are truly free, that we are not simply determined by our environment, our upbringing, or even our unconscious drives, we are also confronted with the reality that our lives are, in a very real sense, up to us. That's a heavy burden, because with that freedom comes the realization that we can no longer blame others for our choices or for our failures to make choices, take risks, and move forward in life. This awareness generates anxiety, existential anxiety, because it thrusts us into a position of profound accountability. We ask ourselves, what should I do with my life? How do I know I'm making the right choice? What if I fail? And worse, what if I succeed only to discover that I climbed the wrong mountain? So yes, freedom is exhilarating, but it is also terrifying. It confronts us with the responsibility of authorship over our lives. And that is why, paradoxically, many people would rather flee from freedom. They retreat into conformity, into roles defined by others, into numbness or distraction, anything to avoid the anxiety that real freedom demands. But if we can learn to face that anxiety, not avoid it, it becomes a doorway to creativity, authenticity, and ultimately to meaning.
Okay, back to courage, which you mentioned is needed to confront existential anxiety and find a meaningful path in life. What are some ways people might cultivate that courage and authenticity on a daily basis?
Start small but consistently. Begin each day by asking yourself what truly matters to you. Reflect regularly on your core values and whether your daily choices reflect these values. When confronted with difficult decisions, pause and consciously consider which option reflects who I genuinely am rather than who others expect me to be. It's also important to practice being honest with yourself and others, even in small ways. Courage is like a muscle. It strengthens with regular exercise. Practicing authenticity regularly makes it easier to face larger challenges authentically when they arise.
You've also emphasized creativity and interpersonal connections as crucial aspects of existential fulfillment. Could you offer suggestions on cultivating these in our lives?
Absolutely. Creativity in existential terms isn't limited to the arts. It's about bringing something genuinely new and meaningful into existence, regardless of your occupation or role. Creativity emerges naturally when we confront our freedom courageously and embrace uncertainty as a space of possibility rather than threat. Give yourself permission to experiment, to take risks, and to trust your intuition, even without guaranteed outcomes. Authentic creativity often involves stepping boldly into the unknown. As for interpersonal connections, genuine relationships thrive on authenticity and vulnerability. To cultivate meaningful connections, strive to be fully present with others. Listen deeply, communicate honestly, and don't shy away from sharing your true feelings and uncertainties. Recognize that authentic connection emerges precisely from our shared awareness of life's fragility and uncertainty. When we openly acknowledge our existential realities with others, relationships deepen in remarkable, profound ways.
It sounds like existential psychology encourages a very active, courageous approach to life's inevitable challenges.
Exactly. Existential psychology emphasizes active engagement rather than passive resignation or avoidance. Life's inherent struggles, anxiety, uncertainty, isolation, responsibility, can either paralyze us or catalyze profound personal growth and genuine human connection. The choice ultimately is ours.
I guess that's why the existential psychology approach isn't so pessimistic or nihilistic. Ultimately, we have the ability and the freedom to grow and become what we want if we give ourselves that choice.
That's right, exactly.
Dr. May, as we near the end of our conversation, I'd like to ask how you view your contributions within the broader field of psychology. Looking back, how do you see your role in shaping modern psychological thought?
That's a thoughtful question. I suppose I've always seen myself as something of a bridge, a translator, if you will, between the philosophical richness of the existential tradition and the practical concerns of psychology. At a time when psychology was leaning heavily toward behaviorism on one end and overly abstract theory on the other, I felt there was a desperate need to reintroduce the human soul, so to speak, into the conversation. I tried to bring depth back to psychology, to remind us that we are not simply bundles of conditioned responses or reducible to diagnostic categories. We are meaning-seeking, anxiety-bearing, choice-making beings, confronted each day with the raw fact of our existence and tasked with the challenge of living it authentically.
And what would you hope future generations of psychologists take away from your work?
I would hope they remember that psychology is not merely a science of behavior or cognition, but a human science, that at its heart psychology must concern itself with the question of how to live. I'd urge young psychologists not to shy away from the big questions, the ones that don't fit neatly into controlled studies or clean therapeutic protocols. I'd encourage them to see anxiety not as a pathology to be cured, but as a signal of potential transformation. I'd want them to help their clients face freedom rather than flee it, to assist them in becoming more whole, more courageous, more truthful to themselves, and above all to treat each person not as a case, but as a fellow traveler navigating the deep waters of existence.
How do you feel existential psychology has particular relevance in today's world, the world we live in, the year 2025?
Oh, I think these principles are relevant now, perhaps more than ever. Our current young generation, what I understand you are calling Gen Z, or even the younger ones, what do you call them?
I think it's the iPad generation or something like that.
Yes, that's apropos. They live in an age of overwhelming distraction and disconnection, where people are bombarded by noise and often cut off from their own inner experience. In such a world, existential psychology reminds us to return to what is essential. It calls us back to meaning, to depth, to authenticity. It invites us to stand still, to reflect, and to ask, not what do I want to consume or achieve, but who am I? And what is worth living for? These questions will never go out of style because they are fundamental to the human experience. And if my work has helped even a few people engage with those questions more honestly and courageously, then I'm content.
Dr. May, I want to thank you deeply for this rich and thought-provoking conversation. We've explored the roots of existential anxiety, the power and responsibility of human freedom, the importance of authenticity, and how confronting life's inherent difficulties can lead us not into despair, but into deeper meaning, creativity, and connection. Your reflections on your own life, your clients, and your philosophical influences have offered a truly humanistic and courageous framework for how we might live more fully and more authentically. For those listening, I encourage you to dive into Dr. May's writings. Books like Love and Will, The Courage to Create, and Man's Search for Himself are not just theoretical, they're deeply personal, intellectually invigorating, and emotionally grounding. They're books that don't just inform, they stay with you.
Thank you for those kind words. I hope my writings engage others to think and reflect upon their lives with greater courage and curiosity.
Dr. May, thank you again for joining us today. Your work continues to inspire generations, and we're grateful for your voice, your courage, and your vision.
It's been a pleasure.
And with that, thank you all for joining us on this episode of Mind Tricks Radio. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and above all, stay human. Thank you for listening to Mind Tricks Radio. I hope you have enjoyed the program. For more information about Mind Tricks, please go to my website, www.waikikihealth.com. Please be sure to subscribe to Mind Tricks podcast and accompanying blog to be notified of new episodes of Mind Tricks. Please be sure to follow Mind Tricks on Facebook by following and liking posts by myself, your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan.